Thank you all for being here. This is great. A lot of familiar faces that I recognize, so thanks for coming. Craft. Little word for a big subject. And there's a lot to say, so I'll just dive right in. Okay, so this is basically just the way I'm going to break it up. Craft, as I've evolved, my relationship with craft, a very short history of craft, and craft today. I grew up in this house in Peekskill, New York, as Tara said. You'll notice that pristine lawn out front. That's my mother on the left-hand side, trimming the bushes. Both my parents were very, I would think of them as craftspeople. They were always doing things with their hands. My mother would sit down literally on the front lawn when the weather was good and pick the weeds out by hand. That was like her way of meditating, and I would help her do that sometimes. The neighborhood hated us for this lawn. Multiple acts of vandalism were perpetuated. Here I am with my older brothers, and I'm showing this because of the haircuts. My father cut our hair, which was a traumatic experience every time, but we got through it. I've only been to a barber twice in my life. I still cut my own hair. My mother made a lot of her own clothes. I have many memories of her sitting at her sewing machine in the dining room or laying out fabric and patterns on the living room floor, cutting them out. She made that Batman costume for me one Halloween, which I was incredibly excited about. Later on, she started getting into crafts as we know them. We actually made those Clorox bottle piggy banks, minus the poofy thing on top. And the angels, I remember making those with her, so a lot of hours at the kitchen table doing things like that. This is the earliest existing drawing of mine, and you can see my mother was very proud of it. She wrote, "Stephen made this drawing 3 years old, 1965." And then she pointed out that the horse has 5 legs. And I like to think that this was my sort of initiation into surrealism, because I am a surrealist, and I like to think it started here because of that sort of praise that she gave to me for doing it wrong. A few years later, still doing the same thing. I won't try to pronounce the name of that beast, but I kept all these childhood drawings in a box, and when I went away to college, my mother found them, realized they weren't signed, so she very nicely went through and signed them all for me. I still have this book. This book had a huge, huge influence on me. Perplexing puzzles and tantalizing teasers. It was filled page after page with these realistic black and white drawings. And each one of them had some sort of optical illusion going on. So again, this is what I'm still doing today, creating surreal images that at first glance look believable, but the more you stare at them, the more you realize that there's something not quite right. And I love that idea. By the time I got into high school, I discovered Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Had another huge influence on me. There was a calendar that came out each year for 4 or 5 years, illustrated by these twin brothers, the brothers Hildebrandt. Loved those calendars and would stare at them in my room all the time. And this particular style, too, really appealed to me. It's almost Rembrandt-esque. Looks a little Renaissance-y or Baroque. And when it came time to graduate from high school, I was asked to illustrate the cover of the yearbook. And as far as I know, this was the first time, at least for the company that did our yearbooks, the first time an illustrated cover was ever used. Prior to that, it was just a template that they used all the time. But you can see the influence here. That was a huge honor. Then I go off to RISD, as Tara said. I was so naive when I got there. I had only been to art museums twice before actually going to art school. So freshman year, you're exposed to art history, and my mind was just blown. As far as I was concerned, realistic drawing and painting was all that there was, and then suddenly we started investigating art history, and suddenly I'm aware of exactly how broad a subject craft is, how many different ways you can get your message out there as an artist. I like this sort of analogy, the cart and the horse. We as artists or creative people are the people in the cart. Our concept is in the wagon. We know what's in there. And craft is the thing that gets the message to our public, or whoever we want to convey that to. There's two sets of perspective. You as the artist sitting in the cart, you know what you're bringing, and you're looking out over your craft. The people you're bringing your message to, they see the horse first coming at them. So it's our job to find a good balance between the craft and the concept to make those work together as well as we can. Freshman year, this was a self-portrait, an assignment that we were given. It was about 4 feet tall. And you can see there's that realistically painted eye up in the corner. And I'm starting to question the whole idea of realism and representation, experimenting with collage there. There's a photograph in there and paint. So I'm starting to mix it up and sort of test the waters. In between, when I would come home for summer vacation, most often I was doing sculpture actually, which is kind of strange, but I felt a real freedom in doing that. And this was a piece that I did. It was originally going to be a full table setting, a spoon, a knife, and a fork, and the whole thing. I only got as far as the spoon, but the idea was to take a concept that's so simple and basic, like eating, and complicate it to the point with craft laid on top that it becomes absurd. So I made this wooden box that the spoon fit into. You turn that red knob on the top, and the spoon would go in and out, and the little door would close. So I'm really thinking about craft and balancing that with what you're trying to say. I was in the illustration department, and thinking outside the box was really discouraged. You were given an assignment. If you didn't come in with the expected resolution to that assignment, it didn't go over very well. So I started getting incredibly frustrated. But there was one teacher of mine, Chris Van Allsburg, who you probably know from the Polar Express and Jumanji that have both been made into films. He was still teaching there, and he was the only one who really encouraged thinking creatively and bringing in, just thinking outside the box. He hit it big and left the school, never to be seen again. Chihuly was there too. He was head of the glass department. This was at the time when glass was still considered simply craft. They were really fighting hard to have craft be recognized as an art form. And certainly he did a lot of good in that direction. He rebuilt the whole glass hot shop there at the school. Then he hit it big too and left and never came back. So both of those guys were examples of people who sort of marry their concept with their craft and make it work for them. I graduated, while I was in the illustration department, I tried to switch into the painting department, but the faculty, the administration said it was too late. They wouldn't let me do it. So I graduated, moved back to New York where I lived, created this portfolio. There's 3 more of this set. I had 9 little paintings. So I moved into Soho in New York, would go to all the galleries, trying to find a gallery to represent me. And after 6 months, nothing was happening. So I was starting to run out of money. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I fell back on my illustration training. And to my chagrin almost, it took off. I did it for the next roughly 13 years, and was very good at it, and it turned out to be a very lucrative job. This was a poster I did for Microsoft. You can see a lot of Dali influences there. He had a huge influence on me. And I have to say, this was before Photoshop. So if you wanted an image like this, you had to hire an illustrator to do it by hand. Celestial Seasonings was another client of mine that I did a lot of work for. Sony Music, this was a cover of a CD for Journey. Probably the most creative job I ever had, because all they did was give me the lyrics to the songs from the album and said, do whatever you want to do. So, but that still wasn't satisfying enough. I still wanted to be a fine artist and just make my own statements. Moved from New York to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. You would think that would be counterintuitive, but I started putting a lot more effort into my fine art. Was still doing illustration, but this painting got me into the best gallery in DC at the time. It was called Gallery K. They've long since closed, but and again, this was when you'd send slides through the mail to a gallery, and they'd write back a letter, you know. So this was kind of the beginning of my painting career. And notice the color palette here as opposed to these other ones, which are very bright and colorful. Things start to get darker. Even though I was realizing my dream, things in my personal life were starting to get not so happy. And it was reflecting itself through my work. This was a great painting. I really like this one a lot, from about that same time. But you can see the color sort of draining out to the point where my work almost got black and white. It was, the whole idea of adding color to my paintings, it didn't make sense because it wasn't how I was feeling at the time. It all culminated one year. Both my parents died within a year of each other. I got divorced. I got arrested and thrown in jail, and a couple of other things that I don't have to go into. But things were really kind of bleak, and ironically, I was doing more work at this time than I ever did in my life. Normally I do about 8 paintings a year. I was doing 16. So, you know, that whole suffering artist idea, I guess it was true in my case. Then everything changed. I got back in touch with my high school sweetheart. We got married. She's not here today, I'm sorry. But it was like the sun came out. It was amazing. Everything changed. It might be a little hard to see in these, but the color started to come back into my work. I started experimenting a little bit with abstraction and blending, sort of like that first self-portrait from college with the realistic eye and the more expressive backgrounds. Did that for a while. It was a good experiment, but then I went back to what I typically am known for, and learned a lot from that, and carried forward what I could into my current work. This is a fairly recent painting. Series of what I call mermaids, definitely with a Florida theme to it. So, you know, where you live definitely finds its way into your work, or can. Now, here's what I've learned about craft. Just raise your hand if anybody knows what this is. Nobody, good. This is the Macapansket pebble. It's almost 3 million years old, and it's worn smooth because it was handled so much. People passed it from person to person and kept it possibly for who knows how long. But as far as craft goes, nobody made it. It was a found object. But you can say it's the first work of art, or the oldest work of art that we know. It didn't have a function, and it was just appreciated for its aesthetic value. And again, nobody made it. We'll get back to that. Then fast forward to 500,000 years ago, and we have hand axes. Actually, they existed long before this. But these box grove hand axes archaeologists have been able to tell that they were actually made by the same person. So now we have the artist, sort of, or craftsman, however you want to put it, coming into the picture. And there are other ones that they're larger, they don't show any signs of wear, and we're pretty sure that they were made just, again, for their aesthetic value. So pretty interesting. And of course, cave painting. These are found pretty recently, I think. They go back 64,000 years. These are made by Neanderthals. We used to think Neanderthals were stupid. They weren't. So this is, painting arrives on the scene. Then a bomb goes off. Fast forward to the 19th century and photography is created. It rocks the foundation of all of Western art. And I have to point out I'm talking about Western art here, not specifically Western art. Changed everything. So, what's happened in the last 100 years? We have to talk about Duchamp, who, if you saw the show at the Dali Museum recently, good for you. He started out as a sort of run-of-the-mill painter. 10 years later, painted Nude Descending a Staircase, which created an uproar. The first time he tried to show it, it was refused, or he got talked out of showing it. That kind of pissed him off, and he said, all right, I'll show you. So 5 years later, he was part of a group called the Society of Independent Artists, and if you were a member of that society, you could submit a piece to this show that they were organizing, and there was no jury, they would just accept it. So he went out, bought the urinal, submitted it, and he couldn't find it at the opening. It was behind a partition. So again, these supposedly open-minded, creative types just couldn't go there. So pretty much after that, he stopped making art, almost. But you can't stress enough the importance of that object. The bed has been a popular subject in art. We've got 3 examples here. One is Eugene Delacroix, painting around the time that photography was invented, using very traditional media. That's a watercolor of his bed. Fast forward to Robert Rauschenberg in the 50s. He takes his bed and puts it on the wall and adds paint to it, and people don't know what to make of it. It's like, well, is this a sculpture? Is it a painting? Are you allowed to use your own bed, kind of thing? And then, I think 50 years later, one of my favorite artists, Tracy Emin, takes her own bed, again, doesn't do anything to it, just takes it as it is from her bedroom with used condoms, empty vodka bottles, cigarettes, stains, everything. Places it in the gallery context, and it becomes art. Again, where's the craft there? Duchamp really opened the door for artists like Warhol, Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst. These are all artists that people love to hate, primarily because the argument is usually, well, they don't do it. They don't make their own art. They have people doing it for them. So there's Koons and Warhol in their ateliers or workshops, factory in the case of Warhol. It's really not that much different from what was happening in the Renaissance, the whole structure of the artist's workshop and assistants and all that sort of thing. People think we've come a long way, but we really haven't. Here I am in my studio. Thank you, Stephen, for taking the photo. Again, no assistants, I'm all alone. I do everything myself. I stretch my own canvases, I make my own frames. I probably do too much. I was just talking to Stephen in the back who was talking about virtual assistants, and that might happen someday. It's hard to see the painting on the easel behind me, but that's it. My latest painting. It actually just sold the other day at Articles. Leslie Kern is here somewhere. That's where I'm at today. And what all this thinking about craft and self-education in art history, the point it's led me to is, you've heard this before, anyone can be an artist. I really, really believe that, truly. And by extension, anything can be art if you, the artist, say it is. And the beauty of this is a reflection of the power of art at its core. The thing we need in this world today is communication and dialogue. So much of the misogyny, xenophobia, racism, all those things are really a product of ignorance and fear. Fear of people that are different from us, things that are different from us. So craft, the fact that it's sort of expanded to the place that really anything can be craft. You can make a message out of anything. We really need more of that. So for all of you creatives here, find your concept, link it up to a craft that works for you and for the concept, and send it out there. We need that. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure how to convey this question or word it properly, but I've always been really fascinated by art, but I feel like I never have the correct context or education, or I always tell myself, I want to learn more, I want to learn more. But I feel like, compared to music or movies, art might be one of the fields that people are less formally educated about. So what's it like working in a creative space like that, where it might seem intimidating to people, or like they do have that education barrier to appreciating the history of it?
Well, the beautiful thing about art, like you said, is that you don't need a license, you don't need a degree, you don't need anything. You just need a creative impulse. Was your question about me, how I work in that environment? I guess in the beginning that was an issue, and then I slowly worked my way out of it and just realized that all that mattered was me doing the best for me. Me finding, like I said, my best way to express what it was I wanted to express in the medium that I wanted to work in. Painting the way I do, it's almost old-fashioned in a way now, but it's so satisfying for me, and I love it so much. It just feels right. That's what everybody needs to do, and not worry about criticism, or, that's easy to say, but really just do whatever you want to do and find your joy in that. Katie?
Yes, I know you work in series. Oh, sorry. You work in series, but I was wondering, where do you get your inspiration? Is it meditation, dreaming, looking at images, looking at nature? What inspires you to create your images?
I do work in series, but it's not intentional when I begin the series. I'll just do a painting and finish it and feel like I didn't say all I had to say about that, so I'll do another one, and eventually it'll run its course, although that's not true. But my inspiration comes from a lot of different places. Most often, the way I get a painting started is I look through magazines. And I look for images of people, because all of my paintings have people in them, the human figure combined with elements from nature. So if I see an interesting face or an interesting pose, or that's something like that, and if it holds my interest for more than a few minutes or a few seconds, I'll think, there's something there. There's some reason I'm attracted to that. So I'll save it, either use it immediately or go back to it another time. I also I get emailed. There's a site that they send black and white photographs from the turn of the 20th century, and a lot of my paintings are taken from those because it's not your typical beautiful face. They're normal people. Sometimes the poses are interesting. So, and in general, these are just my thoughts about the human condition, you know, how we relate to our environment, and the other side is believing and knowing that there's a whole environment inside of us, which I think we're great at exploring the outside world, but people spend very little time, or not enough time in my opinion, exploring their inner worlds, which can be even more scary. So I think it should be mandatory for everybody on the planet to go to therapy for 2 years. I do.
Thank you.
Yes?
So 2 questions, I guess. What's your favorite art medium and your favorite surface, and where do you purchase your supplies? Because I feel like that's a big hurdle for someone that wants to paint, is like, go out and buy paints, and then that's the first biggest step. But sometimes we're like, do I Amazon that? Do I go to Blake in Tampa? So I'm just curious what you do.
My medium is always, and pretty much always has been, just oil. Like I said, I stretch my own canvases, so very often it's on canvas. Sometimes with the smaller pieces, it'll be on a masonite panel. But I've always just gotten my supplies online through a company called Utrecht that now I think has been bought by Dick Blick. So whenever I need something, I just put in an online order and it comes to the door. And my process is incredibly simple. A lot of representational painters out there, you talk to them and it sounds like you're talking to a chemist. I don't know, it doesn't resonate. All I use is paint, a medium, which I mix in with my paint to make it flow better. I buy crappy brushes, and that's it. There's no, it's not a high-tech endeavor. Yes? Yeah.
I like the phrase "anything can be art." I think it democratizes art and it opens up, you know, that capability to anybody that has an emotive quality of a thing. Do you think there's a possibility, though, that status has a lot to do with your ability to call something art? Like, you know, the ability for any one of us to move our, you know, bed into a space and call it art would be very less. We'd have a lesser ability than somebody who has status as an established artist. Do you think that the established artists kind of have a little bit more control in the investment of what is actually called art versus any of us?
Yes and no. I think you're right. There is a structure in place that allows that sort of dynamic to go on. But I think what's happening is that, like I said, the ability to create art is more and more being put in the hands of people who don't necessarily want to work inside that system and don't have to today, thanks to technology. And you know, that old gallery system and museum system it's getting rocked. So there's more and more ways and opportunities for ordinary people to make art and get it out there and sell it and have it be appreciated, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Hello. We're definitely going to sell that, just so you guys know, our coloring panel, if anyone's interested. Sorry, Tom, you're next.
So as you're entering this digital era, and a lot of your work and most artist work is a physical sense, how do you see that transitioning as we move towards more digital galleries, as we move towards more digital mediums to produce our work?
To produce it or market it?
So just like as a whole, like how do you see like creatives transitioning from like a physical world to a digital only world?
Well, I guess I'm struggling with that now because you know, in the old days, pre-internet, you had to rely on galleries and personal contacts and that sort of thing. I was telling again, Stephen in the back, I spend probably half my day on the computer, self-promoting, updating Instagram, you know, whatever, all those things. It's taking me away from my easel more and more, which bothers me. And I was saying to him too, someday I'm going to have to maybe get some help to free me up to do more work again. Although, I don't know, it seems to be working. And the thing is, I enjoy that. I enjoy the marketing. I've got a little bit of education in that. So I enjoy it, and it's fun. It's satisfying. So, but one day it might just get to be too much.
Hey, what was the most difficult creative block you ever went through in your life? And what were the tools you used to overcome it?
This is strange to say because at the time I didn't believe it. But 9/11, actually. When that happened, the way I was working back then, I had like a conveyor belt of ideas, concepts in my head. So I'd finish one painting and then just immediately go on to the next one. And when 9/11 happened, I was reading a lot about other artists who they couldn't work. They couldn't work after that. All of their ideas and concepts seemed trivial suddenly. And I just kept on going. I went on for 6 months, working on these ideas that I had, till I got to the last one, and then it hit me. And I thought, this isn't resonating anymore. It doesn't seem to be relating to the world. And I think that was actually the beginning of that sort of downward spiral that I went into because I started questioning everything. So how did I get out of it? I just kept working. Like I said, that was the most productive period in my life. And I think that got me through to the other side. Rather than stop and do nothing, I also learned a lot at that time because I realized that if an idea that I have seems like it's not going to be received well, I went ahead with it anyway. And I've learned through that I can do paintings that I think no one is going to like or buy, and they'll sell immediately. So I'm the worst judge of my own work to know in advance what's going to sell, what's going to appeal. I'll do other ones that I think, wow, that's a masterpiece. And I've got a studio full of those, literally. So just work through it, keep working, no matter what.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the tough question. So, and this is, we can pose this to the group because I'm interested to hear what you guys think. We were talking about this idea that anyone can be an artist and anything can be art in the context of the baker who said that the cake that he made, or the cakes that he makes, are his craft and his art, and he refused to make them for a gay couple. So where is that line between anyone can be an artist and anything can be art, and then weaponizing that? That's the end of the sentence. Do you want to
talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead and you talk
Yeah,
about
this
it.
was, I'd been working on this presentation for a while and came across the article because the Supreme Court, this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they just ruled on it a few weeks ago, and they ruled in favor of the baker. And they used the exact argument that I just made. So suddenly, it went from being this beautiful, loving sort of endeavor to suddenly, like you said, it turned into this weaponizing defense justifying discrimination. And I don't know where to fall on that because I have to side with the baker in a way because there's a thing called creative autonomy. You can't tell an artist what to make. And yet, if you extrapolate out the ramifications of that ruling, there's a concept of emotional labor. And the thing that sets artists apart is they invest their work with emotional labor. They're emotionally invested in it. Well, flight attendants do that. Nurses do that. So can those people now say, I'm not going to serve you because I disagree with your religious beliefs? So it's a really scary thing. And the way that the court phrased their ruling, they sort of acknowledged that. And they said, that we got work to do on this. So I don't know where it's going to go, but it's a little bit scary.
Does anybody have any thoughts that they want to share on that?
So art is full of emotion, happy, sad. And art can be offensive and insulting.
Absolutely.
So that's just one aspect of it. We all have an opinion, and it's okay for him to exercise his, I guess, as insulting and as offensive as it is.
Well, there's offensive art, and then there's discrimination, and that's the question here. We're free to say whatever we want. We're totally free. You can be as offensive, disgusting, and those artists are out there. But can you use that as an excuse to discriminate against other people?
I don't want to drop the mic.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting kind of thought experiment because like this is an inclusive statement, and yet it's being used to discriminate and exclude people.
I think that everything that you said circles back to one thing, perspective. It's the person's perspective that is viewing the art or the situation or whatever. And just because one person thinks something or one group of people thinks something, it all goes down to what's inside of you. And we all can't walk in everybody else's shoes. Nobody can walk in ours. So art and everything, how we see the world, is just our experiences in life. And that comes out how we view what we're looking at and how we perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
All right, I feel like we need to talk about something like more upbeat. I was like, we can't end on this, Stephen. Like, we can't. It's important.
I had it in the talk, and we took it out because we didn't want to end on that note. But okay, so.
But it's interesting, yeah. Explore your inner environment, as Stephen said. Was there a hand back here?
I do have a question on an unrelated note. So you switched from illustrating to painting, and I know sometimes, as some people anyway, frown on switching mediums, or there's kind of like a mixed grab bag of, can you just do any medium, or can you change from one to another? And did you have any sort of backlash about that, or any thoughts about that?
Did I change mediums?
Well, from illustrating to painting.
No,
in a sense
no. All
that-
the illustration work I did was in
painting.
oil.
Okay.
But it's funny, at the time, and this has changed since then too, when I was illustrating, I was using another last name because I didn't want people to know.
Oh, okay.
Because back then, illustration was, like glass, not considered an art form. It's totally changed today, and things have kind of blended together. So I didn't want anybody to know because my plan all along was to become a painter, and I didn't want anyone to make that connection between the illustration work I was doing and the fine art. So.
Well, I guess that's what I was wanting to talk about. I have two separate websites personally because I use two different mediums, probably for the same reason that you had a different name back then. But that was kind of my question is, maybe you didn't get any backlash since you used a different name.
No, I guess I avoided that, but that's a good question. I mean, there are artists out there who change their craft medium every time they create something new, and it works for them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I guess the thought that you even knew to avoid that is like kind of my point of like, it's looked at somewhat oddly.
I'm sorry, I think for me, I'm a very simple-minded person. Once I latch onto something, I don't let go. So I started with oil and started to master it, and once I mastered it, the thought of switching, I just couldn't imagine that at all. You know, that was, like I said, I dabbled in abstraction a little bit, and when I did that, I stopped doing it because I realized if I'm going to be any good at that, I'm going to have to spend another 30 years to be good with working abstractly. So that's why I went back to what I had been doing before.
Thank you. Can we give Stephen another round of applause, please?
Thank you. Thanks, John.